Hi, my name is Joel Comiskey, and I've had the privilege of doing small group seminars around the world. And I tell pastors and churches not to follow models. When a pastor or a church follows a model, that pastor loses creativity, because the pastor is always saying, what would the founder of the model do? And there's always one step behind. Really, we need to follow the Spirit of God so we can say, Lord, what's next? Another problem with following models is that models cause division. When somebody's very successful and says, look at my model, oftentimes churches divide then and say, yeah, I'm going to follow this model. And I've seen this over and over. In fact, there are certain cell church models that I can't even mention around denominations and countries because of the division they've caused. So we need to follow principles. I like to tell pastors and churches that there's three things. Number one, the biblical foundation. That's the main motivation behind doing small group ministries, because it's biblical. But number two, there are certain principles that all small group based churches are following. The third layer is seeking to become an example wherever you are. When people do come and say, I want to learn from you, you don't say, well, yeah, follow my model exactly. No, rather, here are the principles. Ask the Spirit of God to guide you and direct you. Now, besides the biblical base, I'd like to highlight four key principles that I have found in all cell churches around the world. Number one, prayer. We need to say to God, God, help us. Only you can give us the growth. And that's what I found in all of these growing cell churches. They were praying churches, whether they had all-night prayer meetings or prayer chains or small group prayer. Prayer was the key. I remember I was in one famous cell church, and they had constructed like an apartment upstairs and in the sanctuary, and so I could see the platform. And you know, I didn't need an alarm clock during that stay, because at 4 a.m. I was up hearing the singing and the worship, and then they had the prayer meeting, and then at 5 a.m. another group came in, and at 6 a.m. another group, and 7 a.m. another group. This was a praying church, and God was bringing revival in that church. And you know, I found that true in all of these cell churches. They were praying, they were dependent upon God. Now, I don't believe we can manipulate God. He is God, we are not. But my theory is that when churches pray, God likes to hang out. He comes and He dwells among His people. Prayer is so critical. In fact, my wife always says, Joel, remember to tell the pastors, the churches, that prayer is critical. Because I have a tendency to talk about other things, you know, techniques and so forth. And I always have to come back to prayer. God is the one who blesses. The second principle is that the lead pastor and pastoral team having a passion for small group ministry and being convinced of small group ministry. Really, if the pastor doesn't get it, the people are not going to get it. If the pastor just says, hey, if you want to try out small groups, that's fine. You know, that church will never become a cell church. The pastor has to really believe that this is biblical and this is the way to go. You know, I like to say it's not enough for a pastor to have a vision. The vision must have the pastor. The pastor must be willing to say, you know, I'm going to go all the way. Because the bottom line is that there will be naysayers. There will be those who will try to lead the pastor in other directions. And the pastor needs to be convinced that this is the way to go. Not only the pastor, but also the pastoral team. It's always a joy to me to see a pastor involved in a small group, personally leading a small group, or at least being part of a team in a small group. Because that tells me that that pastor is connecting the sermon on Sunday with what's going on during the week. The pastor understands what's happening. Now, I don't believe in legalism. I don't believe that a pastor will always be leading a small group necessarily, but I think it's a good sign that to maintain that passion. The third principle is that the small groups are the backbone of the church. And that was always a phrase I heard in these small group based churches, the backbone. And the goal was that everybody would be in a small group to experience the life of Christ, to use their gifts. And then some would be involved in a ministry apart from the small groups. I have a good friend, Kevin Strong, who actually now is in heaven, but he died of brain cancer. And yet the brain cancer was in his backbone, his vertebrae. And there's such a connection between the vertebrae and the brain, they called it brain cancer. And you know, the illustration is just that the small groups need to be the wharf and woof, the base of the church, that ministry flows through the small groups. Now, once a person is in a small group, well, then some will choose to be involved in an additional ministry, whether worship, ushers, and so forth. But first, being involved in a small group is so essential. The fourth thing is a clear definition of a small group, a quality definition. You know, I like this definition. I'll read to you. Groups of 3 to 15 that meet weekly outside the church building for the purpose of evangelism, community, and spiritual growth, with the goal of making disciples who make disciples that results in multiplication. We must remember that the cell is the church and the church is the cell. We want to keep a holistic definition, not just anything that is small in a group, but rather this is the church and we're going to make disciples in a holistic small group. Now, those are the four primary principles that I found in all of these growing cell churches. There are other principles. In my book, Reap the Harvest, I have a list of the principles, and I believe this book will be helpful to you. God bless you.
If you like this video, please click on like and subscribe to our channel, but also check out the resources on our website.